Our first keynote speaker is Professor Dr. Joseph Sirgy. He will be underlying the psychological process of the consumers and how they compare their perception of the brand personality with their own self-concept. And I know that Professor Sirgy has numerous publications on these topics. That's why I look forward to listening to Professor Sirgy and give the floor. But in our case, it's not the floor, it's the screen to him. Yes, Professor Sirgy.
Well, thank you so much for this nice introduction. Let me start out by sharing the screen. Okay, well, this presentation is about self-congruity, or sometimes we talk about it in terms of the research on self-image congruence and consumer behavior. I've been doing quite a bit of research on this topic since 1970, in the late 70s. Actually, that was based on my dissertation, and I pursued this line of research for many years. Let me try and give you an idea of what this is about. So in order to position this idea of self-image congruence or self-congruity in the context, in an overall marketing context, we usually talk about brand equity. Brand equity, let's say in the context of tourism, you can talk about equity in relation to a tourist destination. That means, again, we're very much interested as marketers in terms of generating brand awareness, or in this case, it would be awareness of the tourist destination. Brand image. Now, this is the concept that we want to concentrate on. So we'll come back to that. Brand attitude, meaning that, again, people should ultimately have a favorable opinion or a favorable attitude towards the tourist destination. Brand preference, meaning that they would form a preference or make a preference decision about one tourist destination versus another. Ultimately would come and visit that tourist destination in terms of trial and purchase. Brand consumption would be experiencing the tourist destination itself. Brand satisfaction would be satisfaction in relation to the tourist destination. A brand repeat purchase would be, again, visiting the tourist destination repeatedly or frequently. Brand loyalty would be essentially feeling loyal to that particular tourist destination. And ultimately, word of mouth in terms of referral, making positive referral to others to visit the tourist destination. So self-image congruence kind of fits in the context of brand image. So what do we mean by brand image? When we talk about brand image, we talk about how consumers perceive a specific tourist destination in terms of several dimensions: functional attributes, economic attributes, safety attributes, hedonic, moral, and symbolic attributes. And we can be focusing on symbolic attributes. Sometimes we talk about it in terms of brand user image. But functional attributes would be something like, why would I visit a tourist destination? Maybe I would visit a tourist destination for the cultural experience. That would be a sort of a functional attribute. The economic attributes would be how affordable it is, how much money I'm planning to spend there, and whether that would be a consideration in my decision making. Safety attributes, of course, especially in the context of the COVID pandemic, a lot of people tend to make decisions based on safety attributes, as you know, in relation to a tourist destination. Hedonic attributes would be things, what is my perception of the degree of sensory pleasure that I would get if I would visit that tourist destination, in terms of comfort, in terms of the pleasurable experience. Moral attributes would be things like whether that tourist destination is associated with something that is moral or immoral, and whether that would affect my decision making. For example, if we're talking about Muslim families, maybe from a very conservative background, they may think of a place, let's say maybe Anatolia, as being a beach place, but it's rowdy and it's a lot of people are naked, and maybe again that would be their image, and therefore they would make a decision not to visit that place because of its moral attributes. Um, Symbolic attributes, this is what we want to focus on, and this is why it's highlighted in red, and that is the kind of people that visit that place. So we're talking about the brand user image, the kind of person that would use this particular service or product. So what do we mean by that? Let's say if we're talking about in a place like Anatolia, the image of the tourist destination would be something like um, people who go there are professional, young professional, sexy, um, they are essentially beach goers. So that may be the image associated with the kind of people that would visit that tourist destination. So the proposition that we've been hammering on for many, many years is the fact that the image associated with the kind of person that would use this particular product or service, again, makes quite a bit of difference in the person's decision making. Okay, so let's focus on the brand user image. Let me give you examples of what we have in marketing. Let's say, look at Nike shoes. The whole Nike shoes campaign, builds on this image of the serious athlete, as you can see uh, from this ad. Move more, move better. This is Nike. So the image associated with Nike shoes is essentially that of the serious athlete, the kind of person who would use this particular product. Now, the entire Macintosh advertising campaign was very much built on this creative type. That means they're trying to show that the kind of person that would use the Macintosh, now this is way back when the Macintosh was first introduced, is essentially a creative kind of person. You see from that picture, the kind of person who uses a Mac is young, sexy, creative, and the kind of person that uses a PC is sort of the old fogey type. So again, that's the whole campaign was built on the idea of the brand user image of a certain type. Now this is another ad for the Mustang. Now notice that want to be sexy. So you notice the transformation in that image, the transformation of a person who is again wearing a tie to being transformed through driving that Mustang into again being sexy. And as you can see, this whole campaign of the Mustang is designed to again instill an image of becoming sexy, becoming. Note that. The Marlboro cigarettes is definitely the cowboy image. And if, again, if that would appeal to certain kinds of people, then ultimately that would influence consumer behavior. From a tourist destination perspective, Paris is very much associated with the brand user image of being romantic. People who are romantic, they want to engage in this kind of activity, being romantic. Then Paris is a sort of the ultimate destination. This is in the Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida. Again, the typical image associated with that is the sort of the family that has young children. So that sort of gives you an idea of what we call the brand user image, which is at the very bottom of this model. So the idea then, brand user image, ultimately affects all of these consumer behavior. And there's plenty of evidence that have demonstrated over the past 40 something years that we can actually predict consumer behavior using this idea of self-congruity. I'll come back to that. Um, in terms of brand awareness, brand attitude, brand preference, brand trial purchase, brand consumption, brand satisfaction, brand repeat purchase, brand loyalty, and brand referral. So all of these are what you'll call the dependent variables, and self-congruity, which involves this brand user image, again, um, is made to predict these different consumer behavior uh, variables, and quite successfully. So what do we mean by self-congruity then? Self-congruity is the match between the consumer self-concept and the brand user image. And so when we talk about the consumer self-concept, we break things down in terms of four dimensions: the actual self, the ideal self, the social self, the ideal social self. And I'll talk a little bit more about these. So it is the match between the consumer self and how people see themselves, like to see themselves, how they are perceived, how they think they are perceived by others, and how they like to be perceived by others. These are essentially the different dimensions of the self concept. And they interface, they sort of match or mismatch the brand user image to cause this actual self congruity, meaning that there's a match between the actual self and the brand user image, the ideal self, again, the same kind of thing. So the greater the match, the greater the predictive power of these variables to the consumer behavior. So let's be a little bit more specific to try and understand those specific dimensions and the underlying self-concept motives that drive consumers to act in certain ways. So we break things down in terms of what we call the private self and the public self. So the private self is, this is the image that I have of myself and I like to become, to be. Uh, so this is something very private, which is very different from the public self, and that is, it's the image that I believe others see me. It is my public persona, so to speak. So when we talk about actual self-congruity and ideal self-congruity, that, these two variables belong to what you call the private self. So actual self-congruity is the match between the actual self, which is how I actually see myself, and the brand user image, and that match ultimately impacts, a variety of consumer behaviors, from brand awareness to brand attitude, all the way down to something like brand loyalty and brand referrals. Um, so the underlying motive associated with what makes people uh, approach a specific product or service as a function of this experience we call actual self-congruity is this underlying need for self-consistency. So what do you mean by self-consistency? People have a need, a psychological need, to make sure that the image of themselves is consistent with their behaviors, whatever the behavior is. And of course, we're interested in consumer behavior. And of course, in the context of tourism, it would be uh, it would be visiting something like visiting the tourist destination, or those variables associated with that. So the need to act in ways consistent with how I actually see myself. Now, this is very different from the ideal self-congruity, which is the match between the ideal self, how I like to become, and the brand user image. So this behavior, it influences consumer behavior through what we call the need for self-esteem. It is the need to act in ways to approach how I like to become. So people have certain ideal images of themselves, and therefore reducing the discrepancy between the actual self and the ideal self, again, would enhance self-esteem. So let's say visiting a place like Anatolia, again, a person wants to feel sexy and young and professional, if they would see that people that would go there to in a place like Anatolia, again, uh, that would enhance their self-esteem by doing so. The public self is very much driven by what we call social self-congruity, which is the match between social self, how I think others see me, and the brand user image. And again, the underlying source of motivation is social consistency, the need for social consistency. And that is the need to act in ways consistent with how others see me. So if other people see me as young, sexy, and professional, then ultimately, and I see the people that would go to a place like Anatolia would be exactly that, then I would feel motivated to visit a place like Anatolia. Ideal social self-congruity is the match between the ideal social self, how I like others to see me, and the brand user image. So that is driven by what we call the need for social approval, the need to act in ways to gain approval and avoid disapproval from others, especially significant others. So if people, you know, feel that they would think highly of me if I would go to a place like Anatolia, then again, that would make me feel motivated to visit such a place. So we have quite a bit of supportive evidence from the consumer goods arena, from automobiles, consumer magazines, alcoholic beverages, mobile phones, and of course, in the context of travel and tourism, again, we have plenty of studies that have documented this phenomena we call self-congruity. Again, studies with consumer services like tourist attractions, destinations, hotels, restaurants, and the like. From retailing, we've got plenty of evidence in relation to clothing stores, department stores, discount stores, shopping malls, and shopping centers. From housing and real estate, we have plenty of studies in relation to retirement communities and how this business of self-image congruence, or self-congruity for short, again, drives consumer behavior. Finally, again, we want to talk about how this concept of self-congruity um, um, is important in terms of theory development, in terms of research, in terms of the managerial implications. In terms of theory development, um, this self-congruity theory is essentially a theoretical foundation to try and explain many behaviors, including, of course, tourist and patron behavior in a sort of what you call a tourist or an HDM context. Uh, so the idea is that we can, although we are able to predict a variety of consumer behaviors, we can extend those consumer behaviors to areas. One of the areas of research that I've been getting into over the last many years is quality of life. Quality of life would be things like satisfaction, it would be stress, it would be health-related outcomes, it would be subjective well-being. Now we are developing extending the theory of self-congruity to help explain how people, when they visit a tourist destination, they don't feel good about it, but they also feel satisfied with their lives, meaning that such an experience, contributes to their life satisfaction, their personal happiness. So this is a foundation, a theoretical foundation that would allow us to predict quality of life types of variables. Research support, self-congruity research has proved to be highly predictive of consumer behavior outcomes, including important patron and tourist behavioral outcomes. And the idea is to be able to extend the model to include additional moderators, mediators, antecedents, and other behavioral outcomes. Let me just give you one example. Let's say, under what conditions would something like actual self-congruity would be more predictive of tourist behavior than something like maybe ideal self-congruity. So what are those conditions? How about the differences between the public self and the private self? What are those moderators that would help, help us, further explain more variance in the dependent variables, whatever it is, by including those moderators. Um, Finally, we have managerial implications. And again, as I've showed you the ads at the very beginning, uh, developing a whole ad campaign around the brand user image in such a way that would cause a match between the consumer self-concept and the brand user image ultimately leads or motivates people to feel good about the destination and of course make a host of decisions related to again that particular destination. Um, on that note, if you're interested in references related to the research, there's a whole bunch of references and articles and books. Uh, uh, so if you like a copy of those slides, don't hesitate to contact me. And again, the email address is essentially my last name, Sirgy, by the way. It's pronounced Sirgy, not Sirgy. uh, uh, and
Apologizes.
oh, no problem at all. All the time. um, and thank you very much for allowing me to, share my thoughts with you. Okay, now I
Thank
will.
you. Thank you very much, Professor Sirgy, for the interesting presentation.